Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be speaking about the difference between the gerund and the infinitive. In particular about those cases when we must use the infinitive or when we must use the gerund. As you know, these two non-finite forms somewhat compete because after some verbs both of them can be used and the meaning of the sentence may or may not be changed. This is what I invite you to discuss today. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the infinitive constructions and the gerund, you can follow the corresponding links in the description to this video. If you are among those viewers that have been watching my channel for a while and you appreciate what I'm doing, you can support me here or following the link in the description. Now, without any further ado, let us begin. First and foremost, we should remember that both the infinitive and the gerund are non-finite forms of the verb. That means that they combine some characteristics of nouns with some characteristics of verbs. They cannot function as predicates in a sentence by themselves, but they can be a part of a predicative, a part of a compound nominal or a compound verbal predicate. As many of the roles that these two can perform in a sentence overlap with or without a change in the meaning, the choice between the gerund and the infinitive may pose some difficulty. Let's look at these two examples. To be a farmer means to perform a lot of physical work. Being a farmer means working physically. In the case of these two sentences, it doesn't matter how you phrase your idea because these sentences basically mean the same thing. So you may choose the gerund or the infinitive to express this idea without any change to the meaning of the sentence. The only thing you should remember here is that the structures should be parallel. So if you use the infinitive in the first part of the sentence as the subject, you must proceed with it in the second part. To be a farmer means to perform. Similarly, if you use the gerund as the subject of the sentence, you should proceed with the gerund in the predicative. Now let's look at these two sentences. Gabriel likes swimming and Gabriel likes to swim. Both the gerund and the infinitive can be used after the verb to like. But depending on what phenomenon you choose, the meaning of the sentence will change a little bit. For instance, the sentence Gabriel likes swimming tells us that this is something that Gabriel likes in general. He feels good about doing it anytime, in theory. Gabriel likes to swim, though, means that he practices it. So here we might be speaking about a particular occasion or about a regular practice. Another couple of sentences to consider. I remembered switching the lights off and I remembered to switch off the lights. Here both the gerund and the infinitive can be used, but the meaning will be absolutely different. I remember switching the lights off means that I have a memory of this action in my head. And I remember to switch the lights off means I didn't forget to do it. And the last couple of sentences that I invite you to look at is this. I don't feel like going to the cinema tonight. And he hoped to find her in the canteen. I don't feel like going to the cinema tonight. In this sentence, only the gerund can be used. We cannot use the infinitive. Why? Well, because of the expression to feel like. Feel like must be followed by the gerund. In the last example, only the infinitive can be used, and the reason for that is the same. Because the verb to hope can only be followed by the infinitive. So as you see, sometimes the meaning of the sentence will be changed depending on your choice, whether you choose the infinitive or the gerund. Sometimes there will be no difference in meaning whatsoever, and at other times the sentence will just be incorrect if a particular expression or a particular verb is used only with the gerund or only with the infinitive. Those cases should be memorized. So answering the question when do we use the infinitive and when do we use the gerund, we will follow three principles. First of all, there are verbs that you have to memorize. Basically, you have to learn that list of the verbs that are used with the gerund and that list of the verbs that are used with the infinitive. Second of all, you should bear in mind that the gerund and not the infinitive is used after prepositions. English has a lot of phrasal verbs, and as phrasal verbs normally end in a preposition, they are normally followed by the gerund. And the third thing to remember is that there are verbs that are used with both the infinitive and the gerund. Sometimes the meaning is changed, sometimes it's not, and this is something that you want to clarify, because your sentence might be correct, though it will express not the thing that you intended it to express. Let's start with the first group, the verbs that you should memorize. After the following verbs, only the gerund is used: to avoid, to deny, to excuse, to fancy, in imperative sentences and in exclamations, to forgive, to mind, in negative sentences and in questions, to postpone, to feel like, to look like, and cannot help. Let's look at these examples. Please excuse my not being present at the ceremony. She denied having fed the dog with that fish. He always avoided being asked about his sister. I don't mind your going out with my cousin. Jane doesn't feel like leaving yet. It looks like raining again. Many postpone going to the doctor because they cannot afford the fee. Please pay attention to the modal expression cannot help. There is another expression in English, cannot help but, which is synonymous to cannot help but is used with the infinitive and not with the gerund. So thus we have, my God, I cannot help listening to this song. This means that I cannot stop. I listen to it again and again and again. I can't help but listen to this song. It means the same, but here we have the bare infinitive, listen. She can't help but admire his work. His work undoubtedly deserves admiration. We can't help but notice that she has a soft spot for corgis. Her affection for these dogs catches the eye. It's evident for everyone who knows her. So as you see, cannot help but do something is used just as cannot help doing something, to say that somebody is unable to refrain from something or unable to prevent something from happening. Now let me introduce another list of verbs that are followed by the gerund. These verbs are to be learned by heart: to admit, to anticipate, to appreciate, to avoid, to complete, to consider, to delay, to deny, to despise, to discuss, to forgive, to imagine, to involve, to keep, to mention, to miss, to postpone, to practice, to recall, to recommend, to report, to resent, to resist, to resume, to risk, to suggest, to tolerate, and to understand. What? What is the question that you can put to all of these verbs? To mention what, to practice what, etc. And answering this question, we can go two ways. We can use a noun or a pronoun or the gerund. Let's look at some examples where the object of these verbs is a noun or a pronoun. Tim avoided traffic jams. I can't imagine this. He missed her. Let's now look at some sentences where the gerund is the object of these verbs. Tim avoided visiting his uncle. I can't imagine living this place. And she missed working in the garden. Now let's see what verbs take the infinitive. These verbs are to agree, to appear, to arrange, to ask, to care, to choose, to claim, to decide, to demand, to deserve, to expect, to fail, to get, to happen, to hesitate, to hope, to intend, to learn, to manage, to offer, to plan, to prepare, to pretend, to promise, to refuse, to seem, to swear, to tend, to threaten, to undertake, to wait, to want, to wish, and to yearn. To do something. If this list of the verbs is somewhat intimidating to you now, don't worry, with practice you'll eventually learn all of them. And by practice I mean by reading in English, listening to content in English, and, of course, communicating with English speakers. Let's look at some examples with some of these verbs. He wished to see the papers himself. We expected to arrive by noon. She happened to know their language. They failed to find common ground. He didn't care to discuss the problem. The kids swore to stay friends forever. The guards refused to let us in. The child pretended to be sleeping. The second group, gerund and prepositions. So I once again want to stress that the gerund and not the infinitive is used after prepositions. We can have the gerund after a preposition in various scenarios, basically in 4 different scenarios. First and foremost, it's when there is a preposition that stands alone and the gerund is used after it. Such prepositions are after, before, by, on, in spite of, without, etc. She spoke without looking into her notes. In spite of being very rich, he was not educated. The second case where we can have a preposition before the gerund, it's when the preposition follows an adjective. Such combinations of an adjective and a preposition are afraid of, good or bad at, angry about, crazy about, disappointed about or at, famous for, interested in, proud of, sorry for, tired of, etc. For instance, Anne is tired of listening to her mother's complaints. Clark was afraid of losing the bag, so he tied it to his wrist. We are all disappointed about seeing the forest disappearing. Cats are very good at catching birds. The third scenario where we see the gerund after a preposition, it's when the preposition follows a noun. These nouns are chance, advantage, danger, hope, etc. So we see the gerund after the expressions chance of, advantage or disadvantage of, danger of, beauty of, hope of, method of, opportunity of, difficulty in, interest in, reason for, and so on and so forth. For instance, my sister has no difficulty in speaking Greek. What is the advantage of living in such a remote corner of the country? The last scenario where we see the gerund after a preposition, it's when this preposition follows a verb. So it's either a phrasal verb or a prepositional verb or some other combination where the verb goes together with a preposition. And here let's take a closer look at different possible scenarios. Gerund and phrasal verbs. Normally it is the gerund and not the infinitive that is used after a phrasal verb. Before we go deeper, let's define what a phrasal verb is. A phrasal verb is a combination of a verb and an adverb, or a verb and a preposition, or both, in which the combination has a meaning different from the meaning of the words considered separately. Cambridge Dictionary. What I want to stress here is this part. Has a meaning different from the meaning of the words considered separately. This is what differentiates phrasal verbs from prepositional verbs. Prepositional verbs also consist of 2 parts, of a verb and a preposition. These 2 elements cannot be separated from each other. So there is a verb that is used with a particular preposition and it's always used with this particular preposition. For instance, depend on, or listen to, or deal with, etc. In case of prepositional verbs, the meaning of the verb when it is combined with a preposition does not change. The verb does not acquire a new, different meaning, like it happens with phrasal verbs. Let's look at some phrasal verbs and see what I mean. For instance, we have a phrasal verb to give in. To give in means to stop fighting, to admit your defeat. But if we take the verb to give separately, it will have a different meaning, right? To give, first of all, is to hand something over to somebody else. Or let's take a look at give up. Give up means to quit or to stop doing something. And the meaning of this phrasal verb, the verb plus the preposition, is different from the meaning of the verb to give. More examples. To break down means to stop working. To get away with means to avoid punishment. To keep on means to continue. To screw up means to make a big mistake. To fall for something or somebody can mean to be deceived or to fall in love. To tell off means to reprimand, and so on and so forth. In each of these cases, you see that the verb by itself has a different meaning from the phrasal verb. And let's compare that with depend on, for example. Well, the verb depend, taken separately, means just the same thing as depend on. Why am I talking about it now? Because after some prepositional verbs, the infinitive is used. Let's now look at some sentences where these phrasal verbs are used with the gerund. Alex gave up smoking 5 years ago. He got away with stealing electronic devices several times before the store staff caught them. Jane took a long time to get over losing her dog. We often put off doing things that we perceive to be risky. As you see, the phrasal verbs are combined with the gerunds. I want to stress that here I'm talking about phrasal verbs, understood and defined as a verb plus a preposition that together form a new semantic unit, and not about a prepositional verbs that are basically just a verb plus a preposition. Consider these examples. I looked up the roof and I looked up the word. Looked up the roof means I raised my eyes. I literally looked up in an upward direction. I looked up the word means I searched for the word in a dictionary to find its definition. So in the first sentence we are dealing with a prepositional verb, whereas in the second case, looked up is a phrasal verb. Why is this clarification important? Because there are plenty of prepositional verbs that are used with the infinitive. For instance, agree to do something, refuse to do something, hope to do something, and so on and so forth. After a preposition, the gerund is used. As obvious and straightforward as this might sound, there are some phrasal verbs that sprout doubts in the minds of English learners as to what phenomenon they should choose, the infinitive or the gerund. From my teaching experience, I know that first and foremost, these are those phrasal verbs that end in to. There are phrasal verbs that contain the preposition to, and they are followed by the gerund to. These phrasal verbs are to look forward to, that means to wait for something. To take to means to acquire a habit of doing something. To feel up to means to have energy or desire to do something. To be given to means to be inclined to do something. To be accustomed to means to be familiar with something. To get around to means to do something you've been intending to do for a while. And to be or to get used to means to be or to become accustomed to something. Please know that the expression marked with an asterisk are also referred to as a periphrastic models, and I have a lesson on the topic of periphrastic models. You can check it here or in the description to this video. Let's look at some examples. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Jane's taken to getting up before dawn. People in this region are accustomed to eating white rice. We finally got around to planting those spruces in the ground. Michael isn't used to wearing suits. Pay attention that to be or to get used to and used to are different modal phrases. Used to speaks about a habit in the past, while to be used to or to get used to means to be accustomed to something or to get accustomed to something, to form a habit of something. For instance, we used to live in a small town. This sentence means that in the past we lived in a small town, but we live there no more. We aren't used to living in a town as small as this one means that we don't have such a habit or we don't have such an experience. We are not accustomed to living in such a small town. Apart from the phrasal verbs that end in to and require the gerund, there are also some prepositional verbs, idioms, and adjective plus preposition combinations that also end in to and require the gerund. Let's look. To object to be decided to admit to adapt to go part way to be on the way to be open to be reduced to commit oneself to confess to go back to come close to, with a view to, when it comes to, as opposed to. What question can you put to all of these expressions? The question is what, right? You object to what? You adapt to what? You go back to what? You commit yourself to what? And your answer to these questions is either a noun or a gerund, a verbal that functions as a noun. Let us look at some examples. I think they will be open to negotiating an agreement. My sister confessed to eating all the sweets she was given in one day. She came close to leaving her job several times. Their business in those days was so bad that they were reduced to making their own deliveries. India is the largest democracy in the world and is on the way to becoming a knowledge-based economy. And our company is dedicated to protecting the privacy of all of our clients. So these were some examples of the gerund used after to, used after some expressions that contain to. Remember these constructions, please. Lastly, there is one more thing that I should say about the gerund and phrasal verbs and the gerund after prepositions. What I was talking about is a rule of thumb. And every rule, as you know, has an exception to it. Let's take the phrasal verb turn out, for instance. It means to appear and usually goes in combination with the verb to be, and though it is a phrasal verb, it is used not with the gerund but with the infinitive. Examples. Sam turned out to be a very nice guy. Lots of people turned out to watch the ceremony. In the first case, turned out means that he happened to be, we discovered that he is. In the second case, it means that a lot of people came to watch the ceremony. Then there is an expression would like, which is not a phrasal verb, it's a modal expression, but it should be highlighted that unlike the expression to feel like doing something, would like is followed by the infinitive. I would like to know if there are any tickets available for the evening show, and I don't feel like going out in such weather. Okay, so we discussed some phrasal verbs after which the gerund is used. Now let's look at some prepositional verbs after which we should use the gerund. These prepositional verbs are agree or disagree with, approve or disapprove of, admit to, aim at, apologize for, believe in, benefit from, boast about, care for, complain about, concentrate on, confess to, cope with, count on, decide against, depend on, dream about or dream of, insist on, laugh about, object to, pay for, rely on, resort to, specialize in, succeed in, talk about or talk of, think about or think of, vote for and worry about. Some examples. My brother is always boasting about having met the Prime Minister. The officers insisted on seeing our documents. Alice admitted to having lost the bracelet James gave her. We had to rely on doing everything ourselves. The company specializes in growing hedge plants and shrubs. Now, the third group. The third group are those verbs that can be followed by the gerund and by the infinitive. We will divide them into two subgroups. The first is verbs after which gerunds and infinitives can be used interchangeably without changing the meaning of a sentence. And the second is verbs that take either an infinitive or a gerund but change their meaning and the idea of the utterance depending on the choice of the verbal that follows them. First, let's look at the verbs, after which the gerund and the infinitive can be used interchangeably. These are the verbs to begin, to start, to continue, to propose, to bother, and to intend. It started snowing or it started to snow. The dog continued eating or the dog continued to eat. They didn't bother fencing their plot of land or they didn't bother to fence their plot of land. I intended speaking to him about his behavior or I intended to speak to him about his behavior. Please note that the gerund shouldn't be used after the finite verb in a progressive tense. It was starting snowing is not a good sentence. What we should say is it started snowing, it started to snow, or it was starting to snow if you need a continuous tense. The verbs to advise, to allow, to permit, to recommend, to encourage take the infinitive when they are followed by an object or when they are in the passive form. And they take the gerund when they are not followed by an object. They advised us to book a room in advance, or they advised booking a room in advance. Our father encouraged us to learn languages, or our father encouraged learning languages. Finally, let's talk about the verbs that can be followed by both the gerund and the infinitive, but not interchangeably. The meaning of the sentence will depend on the choice of the verbal. The first verb we are to talk about is to stop. To stop can be followed by both the gerund and the infinitive, with a big change to the meaning of the sentence. My friend stopped eating meat. We stopped to have a snack. The first sentence means that my friend quitted eating meat. He eats meat no more. The second sentence means that we made a stop in order to have a snack. To like. Alice likes walking. And Alice likes to walk to her office. She seldom takes a bus. The first sentence tells us that Alice in general prefers walking to using public transportation. The second sentence speaks about a particular situation. She does it on a regular basis when she goes to her office. And she finds it a good or a right thing to do. This is what she chooses to do in those particular situations. To hate. She hates getting up early, and I hate to bother you, but I need a piece of advice. The first sentence means that she strongly dislikes getting up early. The second sentence means that I regret to bother you. I feel sorry for doing it. To remember. I remember switching the lights off, and she remembered to switch off the lights when she was leaving. The first sentence means that I recollected it. I have a memory of this action. The second sentence means that she didn't forget to do it. To quit. Jane quitted working here and Jane quitted to work here. The first sentence means that Jane left her job here in this company. The second sentence means that she quitted her previous job in order to work here. To forget. Tim forgot to cancel his order, and Ellen forgot ordering those shoes. The first sentence means that Tim was supposed to cancel the order, but he forgot about it. He never did it. The second sentence means that the speaker did something, but forgot about it. Ellen doesn't have a memory of ordering those shoes. To regret. I regret saying those terrible things, and I regret to say that you've been fired. The first sentence means that the action occurred earlier in time. I feel bad about something that I did before. The second sentence means I'm sorry that I must now say it to you. To prefer. I prefer swimming to running. I prefer to go there on foot. Similarly to the verb to like, here prefer doing something expresses a good attitude to something in general. And I prefer to do something, I prefer to go there on foot, speaks about a particular occasion. now, in this situation, I choose to go there on foot. I prefer to go there on foot. To be afraid. She's afraid of living on the ground floor and she's afraid to tell them the truth. The structures here are a little bit different because afraid of uses the preposition and the gerund here expresses the thing that the person is afraid of, an idea or situation or something. He is afraid to tell them the truth. The second sentence speaks about a particular action that the person doesn't feel comfortable about doing now. To mean. I meant to prune that tree last spring, but then I completely forgot about it. Being a good housewife or house husband means doing everything to keep the home clean. In the first sentence, meant to prune means that I had intention to do it. I intended to do it. In the second sentence, mean doing something means that something needs to be done in order to get a desirable result. This is something that it takes. Yeah, being a good housewife means cleaning it well, etc. Try. Everything we do, we try to do efficiently. Do not try to fix the device yourself. Take it to the store where it was purchased for troubleshooting or exchange. In these two examples, try to do something means to make an effort to do something. If you're still seeing this error message, you also can try adding another email address. If it is too hot for you to drink water every day, then try adding fresh ingredients to it. In these two examples, try doing something means experiment with doing it. Try it, why not? Then we have need, want, deserve, require. We'll speak about these four verbs together because the choice between the gerund and the infinitive will depend on whether the subject is the doer of the action or the receiver of the action. Let's look. I need to wash my car and my car needs washing. In the first case, the subject does the action. I need to wash it and I will wash it. In the second case, the meaning is passive. My car needs washing. This way you can say my car wants washing or requires washing or something deserves doing something. These four verbs follow the same idea. And the last one is a phrasal verb, to go on. We can say to go on to do something and to go on doing something. Dora used to be an accountant, but then she went on to study programming. She went on to study programming means that the next thing she did in her life, the next step she took, was studying programming. We speak about two actions that happened one after another. She was an accountant, she became a programmer. Eva went on doing what gave her the most pleasure, painting. Or Sam went on reading, ignoring the sounds from the garden. Go on doing something means continue. We are speaking about an action that continues uninterruptedly. Not one action happening after another, but one action continuing. So basically, we're speaking about two different meanings of the phrasal verb to go on. Now, that being said, I invite you to take a quick test. I suggest that you write down the sentences that you see now on the screen, make your choices, and then check them with me. You have to choose between the gerund and the infinitive based on the knowledge that you acquired from this video. Let's start. This blouse needs mending. The blouse will not mend itself. I or another doer of the action will. For us to have an infinitive there, we need to paraphrase the sentence. We can say, the blouse needs to be mended, or the blouse needs mending. Even though he was late, he stopped to buy a cup of coffee. Because we are talking about the reason why he stopped, or the purpose of why he stopped. She's very forgetful. She never remembers to lock the door. We're not talking about a memory of something, we're speaking about the thing that must be done, the thing that she forgets to do. I'm sure we saw this movie. Do you remember watching it? Here we speak about a memory of something from the past. Do you remember us watching this movie? Do you have such a memory? I'm looking forward to going on holiday. To look forward to must be followed by the gerund. It's a phrasal verb that means to wait for something. In the evening, it started to rain. Or, in the evening, it started raining. In this case, both the infinitive and the gerund can be used without any change in the meaning. Okay, I suppose this lesson was useful and you learned something new. If you have any questions to me, please write them down below. Subscribe to this channel if you don't want to miss my other lessons. Share this video with friends and people that might be interested in learning some English, and see you in the next lesson.